Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show right here over the digital airwaves of YouTube and, of course, iHeartRadio. You know, before I get to my next guest, let me say this because I had to bring up something in regards to P. Diddy. We all know that he's incarcerated. He's in a Brooklyn jail. Obviously, he's been charged with racketeering and along with other charges that I've already brought up on numerous occasions. And then, lo and behold, I'm reading a story with TMZ, and it's talking about how some of the folks that showed up to Diddy's parties all had to sign non-disclosure agreements. And as a result, it had me thinking, and it's got some people out there thinking that maybe, just maybe, he ain't going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Maybe, just maybe, he might get off. I am not qualified to answer such questions, ladies and gentlemen. So I brought somebody on here that would shed some light to it because he's been on here before and he was absolutely spectacular when he joined the show. Joining me to break down the NDA and more about the ongoing case is attorney and CNN senior legal analyst, Elie Honig. Elie, what's going on, man? How are you? How's everything?
Stephen A., election eve. We ready? This is gonna be something to watch. I'm ready. I think people are anxious, but I'm ready to get it over with.
So all of us are anxious and all of us are ready to get it. Two things can be true, and both of those things are true. We're anxious and we're anxious for it to be over and done with.
100%.
But let me get to Diddy for a second with you. NDA, non-disclosure agreement. We read these stories. We hear TMZ talking about it. A lot of people are thinking Diddy may end up winning because you know what? These NDAs may be enforced and nobody may say anything about them. How real is that possibility, Elie?
I would not be overly optimistic if I was Sean Combs or his defense team because of these NDAs. I don't think they're going to do him much, if any, good in his criminal case. Now, here's the deal. NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, they sound bad. They're usually not great. They don't look great, but they're not illegal. Ordinarily, they are legal. Corporations enter into them all the time. There are valid purposes for NDAs and there are invalid purposes. And what courts are going to ask, if somebody like Sean Combs says, well, this person can't testify me against because he or she signed an NDA, the court's going to ask, first of all, is this bad for public policy? And second of all, did the person fully understand what they were signing? Are the terms clear? Did it make sense? Let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that the terms were clear on these NDAs. I'm not so sure that's the case. But then the court's going to get to the other question, which is this against public policy? Would this be a bad idea? And the one thing that NDAs absolutely cannot overcome is a criminal investigation. You cannot avoid testifying in a grand jury, testifying at a criminal trial, turning over evidence by saying, well, I was a guest at one of these events and I signed an NDA, therefore I can't break the NDA. That will not work. Prosecutors will tell you we don't care about the NDA. FBI will tell you we don't care about the NDA. And the law will tell you that in that situation, the NDA does not protect Sean Combs in a criminal case.
Well, then what the hell are we missing, Elie? I mean, when folks signing NDAs, I mean, we're thinking that that provides some level of security for the people who drew up the NDAs because they don't want folks talking their business and they don't want people slandering them, maligning them in any way. If you're telling me the FBI, the district attorney's office, the courts, etc., don't care about it, then how significant is an NDA in today's society?
Yeah, so we see these, like I said, all the time. Corporations have people sign them. Donald Trump famously had people sign NDAs if they worked for him. In other terminology, sometimes people call it hush money. Here's the way they do work, though. Let's assume everything's on the up and up. Let's assume both parties understand what the NDA means and they sign it willfully and voluntarily. Then the way it does work is if somebody speaks out publicly against Sean Combs outside the context of a criminal case, then they can be sued. And this is what sort of Donald Trump's NDAs are. A lot of us may not even realize that we've signed them. When we signed contracts to work for certain employers, there's often an NDA in there that says you cannot, after your employment, disparage fill in the blank organization. And if you do, then under this agreement, we get to sue you. Sometimes it says specifically how much money. It could say some crazy amount, $10 million, whatever. And sometimes it just says we get to sue you for damages. So the reason they do work is, again, assuming that they're sort of written up in a legal way, they can actually be used to prevent somebody from speaking out in a public, non-criminal setting.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because if you know that and you're educating us about that, you certainly can surmise that Diddy's lawyers know that, yet and still, they filed paperwork with the Southern District of New York on Sunday asking the judge to order potential witnesses in his criminal case to be quiet. What do you make of that?
No chance. No chance that motion gets granted. No federal judge is going to say, well, you signed an NDA, therefore you can't be a witness at this trial. Now, judges do, and sometimes can and sometimes do, Stephen, issue what we call gag orders. Again, we saw some of these in the Trump cases where he says, okay, parties to the case, federal government, DOJ, Sean Combs, maybe sometimes even witnesses, you're not to make out-of-court public statements because I don't want you to potentially impact the jury pool. I don't want to create pretrial publicity that may be harmful to the defendant, here Sean Combs, who does have constitutional rights. So you might see a court say something like that, but no judge on the planet is going to say, oh, well, I guess we, the criminal courts, are out of luck because you signed an NDA, so therefore we don't get your evidence. Imagine if that was the case. Imagine if you could keep someone off of the witness stand or out of a grand jury by just making them sign an NDA. You would allow rich, powerful people to avoid accountability like crazy. Just go, oh, sorry, can't testify. You signed this thing.
What is it that people are saying? They're saying that this Diddy NDA is not a standard NDA. What's different about this one if it's not a standard one?
Also, it's interesting. There's no one size fits all. I'd be interested to see the specifics of what's in it. But what judges are going to look at, basically, look, there are, if you just went online and Googled sample NDA, you would see samples, and lawyers use samples all the time. The key things that a judge is going to evaluate. So let's say, hypothetically, one of these witnesses went forward and did an interview, forget about the criminal case, but did an interview with TMZ, let's say, and said, here's what I saw at this event where I signed an NDA. And then Sean Combs said, oh, you violated the NDA. Now I'm suing you. The first thing the court's going to do is let's look at the NDA. Are the terms clear? Are they fair? And is it bad for public policy to keep this person from talking? A lot of times these NDAs are very unequal in terms of the bargaining power, right? You don't even look. Yeah, sure, I agree. You know, these people are often, I assume the people who are signing these were not represented by lawyers. So I think there's going to be some problem enforcing these NDAs anywhere, but again, definitely not in criminal court.
Is it true that some of the Jane and John Doe victims have to be revealed in this case? Is that true?
Eventually, they absolutely will if they're going to testify at trial. It is absolutely standard procedure, Stephen, that at this phase, and we have an indictment, but we're moving towards trial, prosecutors are going to protect the identity of those witnesses, I think, for obvious purposes. They don't want people being intimidated, tampered with. And so, yes, you often will say something like John Doe, Jane Doe, witness one, generic terms. But if and when there's a trial in the state, and I think there will be, then the people have to take the stand, and they can't be anonymous. In some very extraordinary situations, usually involving someone who's a minor, there's ways to protect that person's identity. The defendant would still know who it is, but to protect that person from the public, I actually did that once. We had a 16 or 15-year-old who had witnessed a robbery, and we were able to allow him to testify under certain sort of more confidentially than normal from another room by video feed. But ordinarily, once you put someone on the stand, you have to identify that person to the defense. And anything that happens in trial, Stephen, is public record. You or I could go watch. You can get the transcript. So, yeah, eventually these people's identities will be revealed. But look, the government, when I say government, I mean prosecutors and FBI, they have an obligation to protect these folks and make sure that they're taken care of and make sure that they're not threatened or endangered.
So you weren't here weeks ago. Compared to weeks ago, to where we are right now, in light of the inordinate amount of information that has come out, whether it be NDAs or anything else, is Diddy in any kind of better situation now, at least perception-wise, than he was, dare I say, 6 weeks ago, anything like that?
No, I think he's in a worse situation, as far as we can tell. And we always have to say we're not on the inside. We don't know what's happening behind closed doors. But here's the biggest thing that's happened, Stephen, since we last talked. There's been a slew of civil lawsuits, right, that have come forward and alleged, again, not criminal, but sued Sean Combs and said that he has sexually assaulted and harassed people. Now, here's what prosecutors are going to do. They probably already knew about some of these folks, and so fine. But I assure you, some of these people were previously unknown to prosecutors. Now, as a prosecutor, you don't just take someone who's sued and go, well, that person's good to go. We're going to put that person on our witness list. But you absolutely are going to check that person out. You're going to ask the lawyer, hey, I saw the allegation. I'd like to speak with this person. You're going to cross-check their information. Can I back it up? Can I corroborate it against other evidence? And if you conclude as a prosecutor, well, 3, 2, 1, 8 of these new people are credible, they get added to your case. So I think mathematically that can only mean more witnesses against Sean Combs, even if only 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 of them pan out to the point prosecutors want.